Aha.
Aha. Were you expecting someone else?
You never know. You never know who might drop by.
Well, it's just me. Sorry. My name is Ann Merchant. Sorry, Rick, it's the same old person. And I work for the National Academy of Sciences. And unlike Rick, I hope you're not so disappointed that it's just us again. But I'm joined by the same old guy who's always here. And you are?
I'm Rick Levert. I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. And we hope if you are back again, we are definitely not disappointed. We like to have people who come back again. We wish that we could see you. We miss the energy of people in a room, but it's still really great when we see the numbers clicking and we know that you're joining us. It's an exciting moment. Or maybe it's just the tension of like, how do we hit all the buttons to stop the share and turn on the video and turn on the sound and get it all right. But we're really glad that you're here today because it's a really great event. We really like doing events when there's a direct connection to the work of the institution. I mean, obviously, a program like the Exchange exists specifically. I mean, obviously, it's to promote a special connection to science in general. But when there's that connection to the work of the institution, that's really why we do what we do. So, of course, part of my job is to explain that the National Academy of Sciences is a private nonprofit institution in Washington, D.C. that sits outside the framework of government to do the job that it is meant to do, the job that Abraham Lincoln had prescribed to us in 1863 when he saw the value in expertise that would guide good policy and that would allow the federal government to draw on expertise at that time from the membership of the National Academy of Sciences. But of course, we've gone well beyond just the members of the Academy and now draw upon experts from a variety of fields. And we're joined by the National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Medicine. And so, we do work in so many areas, but as I said, this event today is specific to a report that is called the Promising Practices for Addressing Underrepresentation of Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. This is a topic that we have covered for a long time. I've been with the Academy for a long time, and I can remember some of the ones. Beyond Bias and Barriers is one, I think, from the early 2000s. We did To Recruit in Advance. There was another one, Scarcity and Visibility, I think was the name of it. So this is a topic that has concerned us for a long time because advancing the opportunities for women in science is something that we at the institution take very seriously. Recently, we've just done a report on the impact of COVID on the careers of women in science. I know that's been widely reported in the media, and it's something that the Academies has turned its reporting capacity to as well. So we're really happy that our colleagues at the Policy and Global Affairs Division were really willing and interested in doing an event like the one we're doing today to draw attention to that work specifically, and that they have a marvelous person from their committee who is also willing to join us. But that's why the Exchange exists, to be able to draw upon the power of what the Exchange does and the great power of the academies to do the work that it does in combination. So, Rick, I'm going to let you explain what the Exchange is and does.
Yeah, so the Science and Entertainment Exchange, if you are a writer, producer, director, studio executive, a storyteller of any kind, making any kind of mass media, feature film, TV show, video game, a novel, a graphic novel, you can call 844-NEED-SCI or email us, and we will connect you with a field expert who can answer your questions about your storyline and put them in the context of your story. It's free service. We've done over 3,300 consults since we opened our door. Oh my gosh, 12 years ago. Can you believe it? We've worked on films like The Avengers Infinity War, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Songbird, more recently, Chernobyl. If you are a STEM professional and you're just tuning in and you're like, what is this service? Wow, I want to connect with filmmakers and storytellers. Definitely send us an email. These events have been a great way in the pandemic to connect with you and to find new volunteers. We're always looking for new people to connect with entertainment professionals. Got some other stuff. I want to thank Alex Velasquez because he is doing all the back end tech work today, and we couldn't do this without him because we don't know what we're doing.
Nope, we don't.
Well, I want to thank also the whole office in DC, Courtney Sloan and Jeff Fishman, as well as my colleague Sachi Gerbin in Los Angeles. And also our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who makes all our events possible. They give us the whole budget for this. So this is why we're up and running today. So thank you, Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Also, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, the Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and individual donors like so many of you. Thank you, especially to those people who have joined at our supporter level. I'm super excited. I mentioned this last week. We've got our new challenge coins in. So if you join at the supporter level, you are going to get one of these. I'm sending them to you. Hopefully right now they're going out the door. So thank you. And it's cumulative too. So if you gave $20 to be part of the VIP Q&A session after the event today, those $20 add up over the course of a year, and we will send you a coin if you get to the supporter level. So thank you very much. Lastly, the event's a little bit different today. Structurally, we actually have a real expert, not me, to moderate the Q&A, which I'm really excited about. My colleague at NAS, Alex Hellman, who is a program officer from the Committee on Women and Science and Engineering and Medicine. Alex, I'll let you explain how the Q&A is going to work. And thank you so much for actually lending us your expertise this week.
Thanks, Rick. I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to even share a screen for a moment with two outstanding women like Wendy and Vivian. And I'm really excited for what I'm sure will be an engaging discussion and a wonderful Q&A. So the way this is going to work is after Wendy and Vivian finish their conversation, we're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. And so we encourage everyone throughout the entire panel discussion, as you think of a question or you think of something you really want to ask one of these two or both of these women, to please type it into the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen or at the top, depending on what kind of format you're joining us from, whether it's a tablet, a phone, or a computer. Please type in your questions. We're going to see everything and we'll ask as many as we possibly can. And really excited to hear what you have to ask and, get even more out of this conversation than, just the 40 minutes. So looking forward to a great Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alex. We are really glad that you're here. And as Rick said, it takes the burden off of one of us, because having an expert, an actual program person do this means that it's going to be an even better Q&A. But it also, it emphasizes the point that that this is connected directly to an Academy's report. And this is why we do what we do. So before we get to that, because it's become our custom, we want to talk about, and if we can get Alex to do it too, she's already gone. She's like, I'm not doing it. But
I'm here.
So my rabbit hole for this week is that I read something in the Washington Post. It was so sweet. There is a family in Maryland that, nobody really, I think, fully understood how long we were going home for lockdown. And as we are here at our 1-year anniversary, essentially, of lockdown, this family was 2 researchers in Maryland, and they have a small child at home, young child, and they started putting some things on the wall, just drawing on little pieces of paper, kind of a bit of a timeline of this is what we did this week, this is what's happening. And of course, this has grown. Their whole house now is covered in these pieces of paper that they now call the tunnel. And some of the things they had written on there were things like Governor Hogan issues a stay-at-home alert, 8 p.m., lost our Peapod time slot, baked a giant chocolate chip cookie, canceled our Paris hotel reservation. I had a sleepover. And this thing, as I say, it's called the tunnel because it winds and twists and goes everywhere, but also because there's light at the end of it. And it was just so sweet. Somebody put a rock in our rock garden. It's really pretty. And I just thought, I had so much fun looking at it and looking at the pictures and knowing that in some ways it's so similar to anybody's life these days, and yet so unique to their own lives. It was just really lovely. I really liked it. So Sachi gave you the link. Go take a look. And Rick, you have something that's very technical.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you guys a peek behind the fourth wall here and get rid of this. This is what I'm actually up against. But I wanted to say, so many of you have been to our speed dating events. Ahmed Best is our super host. I was just hideously jealous of his super awesome microphone. So I asked him, where did you get that microphone? And so this represents that I am speaking to you on this microphone, a crazy amount of time spent to try to figure this piece of gear out. But I have to say, universal audio is its own ridiculous rabbit hole if you're a podcaster or a musician. So that's my rabbit hole this week.
Well, thank you for figuring it out, because we did all have to go through some, ow, that hurts my ears.
These poor guys heard like a lot of echoing over the course of the week.
But not you guys, so you're safe. All right, Alex, do you have a rabbit hole?
Yes. So my rabbit hole this week is I live in DC. I live in DuPont Circle, and I've had the pleasure of watching this mural being painted in the alley. It's on this big building in the alley behind my building. And so I can literally see the guy. If you hear beeping, actually that's what that is in the background. But it's a mural depicting the 23-year-old National Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman reciting The Hill We Climb that she recited at President Biden's inauguration. And so it's been really, really fun. You can see, I think they shared a link and you can see the sort of early stages of it, but it's actually now fully on the entire side of the building. So it has like a whole orange mural, and it's been pretty entertaining to just watch outside my window, and a nice break to the monotony of the Zoom calls all day to watch a mural being painted.
Art outside your window. Nobody can argue with that. Well, thank you, Alex, and we look forward to seeing you back at the Q&A. And of course, now we want to hand this conversation over to Wendy Calhoun. Wendy is a very special person to the Science and Entertainment Exchange. She drank our Kool-Aid a long time ago. We handed it over to her, and she is such a wonderful friend to the Exchange. You've moderated conversations for us in the past, and we always love having you on our stage. But I think it's because you really get what we do, and because we know that you understand us, and that you understand how important it is to see these images on screen. And so we thank you for being the wonderful person that you are, and for understanding us. But thank you again for doing this great job. So I'm going to give this to you, Wendy, and let you take it as you always do and run with it in just the right way.
Wow, no pressure. Look at that. Look at that setup. I got to dunk this. That was quite the layup.
You're going to do it.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Science Exchange event. It's kind of fun to be on this side of it today, but I have a little share screen that I'm going to kick it off with. I just want to set the table a little bit about the discussion that we're going to have about women in STEM and give you the perspective from a storyteller's point of view. So let's see if I can get this going the right way. All right. And how about we go full screen mode? Oh yeah, fancy. So you can see here, well, I'll just start with the title. We See You, the Power of Female STEM Role Models. And I have a quote from Miss Gina Davis there. If women and girls see themselves on the screen in STEM professions, they don't see themselves, they're less likely to choose that career path. And that is so incredibly insightful by Gina. And about 7 years ago, I met her and I started really being an advocate for the Gina Davis Institute. Now, the Gina Davis Institute and New Media, they have amassed the largest body of research on gender prevalence in family entertainment, spanning more than 28 years now. Their research findings are in high demand by companies and organizations interested in the empowerment of women and girls. And to give you a sense of what empowerment means to me, it means paying it forward. You see in this picture, it's me, it's Gina, and it's Janika and Jashika James. I advocated very early on in their career, and they are now co-executive producers, but I was there to help them get their first staff writing job. And I believe that that's the power that we have as storytellers to create opportunities. So I hope that you will take this presentation as an invitation for you to create opportunities for the next generation. So now in 2012, the Institute analyzed occupations in children's media and found that for every 15 male characters shown in STEM jobs, there was only one female character portrayed in a STEM profession. So when girls in their formative years don't see female characters on screens as biochemists and software developers and engineers and statisticians, they're less likely to imagine or pursue that career path for themselves. So media portrayals of STEM characters send this profoundly negative message right now that STEM professions are for white men. This narrow representation hasn't improved in the last decade. I mean, of all the STEM characters, men outnumbered women nearly 2-to-1. Actually, specifically 62.9% compared to 37.1%. And the vast majority of STEM characters in entertainment media are white. There's fewer than 16% that are Black. Asian, you're looking at about 5%. Latinx, you're looking at 3%. And Middle Eastern, 1%. One positive finding during this study is that women are just as likely to be portrayed as leaders as men in STEM professions. It's about 50-50, so that's good. Another positive finding is that entertainment media shows women STEM characters as equal or more competent, intelligent, collaborative, and personally empowered in their profession as men STEM characters. So in 2018, Gina's Institute studied the Scully effect. And that was to look at the influence of the X-Files protagonist Dana Scully on girls and women entering the STEM field. Nearly 2/3 of women working in STEM today say that Scully served as their personal role model and increased their confidence to excel in a male-dominated profession. So among the women who are familiar with Scully's character, 50% say that their interest in her increased their interest in working in STEM. So 2009, there was a study. The National Science Foundation found that only 18% of employed scientists and engineers were white women. Guess what? Only 5% were Asian women, 1% were Black women, 1% were Hispanic women. So as content creators, we have a tremendous power to be the change. An example, Hidden Figures, right? Tells a story, true story, of Katherine G. Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, 3 Black women, American women, and mathematicians who served a vital role in helping NASA win the space race for America. So Hidden Figures opened up a much larger conversation about Black women in STEM. And the stories of these 3 women give today's Black female astrophysicists a reference point to talk about their own experiences. The movie helped destigmatize Black women discussing discrimination in STEM, as well as non-Black scientists, to reflect on how they could reform their practices to be better allies to their Black female colleagues. So this film, critically acclaimed, made on $25 million budget, nominated for a 2017 Best Picture Oscar, earned more than $230 million worldwide. So what happened? Well, the US State Department was bombarded with requests from foreign embassies that wanted to screen Hidden Figures. It played at an unprecedented 80 overseas locations. The movie inspired the State Department to launch a first of its kind, publicly funded educational exchange program for women called #HiddenNoMore. The goal, to build on the momentum in 2018 and 2019, #HiddenNoMore invited 50 women from 50 different countries to participate in a cultural and educational exchange aimed at cultivating the efforts and achievements of women in science, technology, and math fields. So these women toured DC, Boston, Chicago, LA, and the State Department's #HiddenNoMore initiative was life-changing for those participants. And it was a promising step in getting more women into STEM. That's just one example of how we, as storytellers, have the power in Hollywood to influence the US government and impact the future for women in STEM worldwide. So that's my little spiel. And I will stop sharing screen so that we can have a really fun discussion with Dr. Vivian Pinn. Hello.
Hi, Wendy, thanks. And I'm delighted to join you in a discussion of something that's always been dear to my heart, and that is women having role models and, more importantly, having mentors.
Yes, I really am so happy you're here with us. So just to give people a little snapshot of who you are, right? So pathologist, researcher, administrator, professor, and a member of the National Academy of Science. Anything else we need to know about the many aspects of STEM you've worked in?
No, I served in pathology for about 25 years, academic pathology, and then I was the founding director of the Office of Research on Women's Health at the NIH. And I have to add that it was in that position that I did get to meet Gina Davis. I met her at a conference on women at the United Nations, and she told us about her efforts to bring more attention to how girls and women were portrayed. And she actually visited us at the NIH. And so I did get to hear from her about her work and really appreciated that she was taking that effort and taking that charge so that women could be seen as we think we actually are and not in the stereotypes that are so often portrayed.
Right. You know, you have seen so much in your travels. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, when you first decided you wanted to become a doctor, were we still in segregation times? What was it like when you first decided to go into STEM?
Yeah, I have to thank my parents. They never told me as a Black girl in the segregated South where there were a few Black physicians, but of course they were general practitioners who made house calls, and I just liked how everybody felt better when the doctors made the house calls, and you know, the patients felt better and the family felt better seeing the patients feel better. And I decided that was something I wanted to do at age 4, thinking then I'd be a pediatrician because the only other doctors I knew was my own pediatrician in addition to the practitioner. So they tell me at age 4, that's when I announced I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I have to thank my parents because they didn't tell me, even though there were so few women in medicine at that time and very few people of color in medicine, they didn't tell me it was something that maybe I couldn't do. I think they used it to help control my study habits because they told me if I wanted to be a doctor, I was going to have to study hard. And that was the message I got. But I have to thank them because even 20, 30 years later, I have met so many young women whose parents, whose families have not supported their ideas of wanting to go into STEM fields.
Wow. So anything special to tell us about the report? Was there something
Yes,
this was being put
most
together
everybody,
that was really surprising?
yeah, actually was delighted to be able to serve on the committee that put together this consensus study report, which was released last year and it came out just before the pandemic hit. So I think we sort of got swamped in the media by the pandemic and didn't get as much exposure, but it is an excellent report. And one of the things that I really like about this report is not only that it's looking at and evaluating what are the major barriers to women in STEM fields and what needs to be done to overcome that, but the whole report includes attention to intersectionality, which means understanding all women are not the same, and we have different characteristics that we bring. And for instance, I'm a woman, so I have to think about concerns related to sex and gender. I'm also a woman of color, so I need to be concerned about that. If you're a woman who's disabled, you have other factors. So in looking at how to advance careers for women in STEM, one answer or one method may not work for everyone because there are differences in how women may be made up or composed, and therefore intersectionality is very important. And I especially like that because so often reports really don't deal with issues of women of color or women with disabilities or women from the LGBTQ, that community. I'm getting my acronym confused here, but looking at other factors and the women who are from immigrant families, women who are first-time college attendees, and that to me was extremely important in this report. We have so many things we can cite, and I could give you a number of anecdotal instances that I've observed or experienced over my career, but it's important because here is a research report that includes actual data based on research that we can then build how to apply methods and the best practices to overcome some of these biases that have affected careers for women in STEM.
Yeah, you know, the data is so helpful to us as writers as well, because whenever I've been put in a position where I had a male character that I wanted to suggest we change it to a female character, I usually had to back it up with some research. Oh, female venture capitalist doesn't exist. Well, actually, here's
Yes.
a list of 4 of them doing quite well, you know.
Mhm.
So it's helpful for us as writers to be sort of armed with the true information that you were the part of the group that curated. How long did it take to put the study together?
The study was actually in development for a while, and then in putting the report together, there were actually 2 phases. One where initial work was done, And there were some white papers that were assigned. In other words, some groups that did some research on certain points that we could then use in putting together our final recommendations. And then the very final report was actually put together in a very short time. But that was because there was probably almost a year's worth of work preceding the time that we did the summary report. But it was an intense effort. I can tell you, it was an intense effort, but it was one that I think all of us on the committee enjoyed because there were so many important things emphasized. Earlier, Anne referred to the report Beyond Bias and Barriers. To me, that was the landmark report. That was a report that really was developed following a need to react objectively to a leading university president who made a statement that perhaps the reason women were not succeeding in fields of math and science was because they lacked the innate ability to do so. And so you didn't want to have an emotional response. We wanted a data-driven response. And fortunately, at that time, the National Academies decided to do a study looking at what are the major barriers for women in math and science and in STEM careers in general. And that is the report that came from that. And I must say that looking back at that report, the bottom line was that it's not a lack of innate ability of women to succeed in STEM. It's that they have to deal in organizational structures that were not designed to accommodate women and some of the special issues of women in STEM. This report really built on that report, as well as on the National Academy's report on sexual harassment of women, which we've also found is a major factor that does affect careers of women in STEM fields. And I think really put forward some concise bottom line points about the major barriers to women in STEM and some of the needed anecdotes to that. How do we overcome? How do we get institutions to change? How do we get individuals to change? And how do we address harassment? How do we address bias? And for that reason, I just have been very dedicated to this report. And I think most of my talks recently have really focused on the value of this report and the important points.
Funny, as you were speaking about that, you reminded me of a statistics that the Gina Davis Institute found, which is that there is this sort of stereotype that you're seeing portrayed by female characters working in STEM in entertainment, and it's that they have to sacrifice their family life or their personal life. There's like a work-life imbalance, and that stereotype is discouraging actually some women from pursuing a career in STEM. But what do you say to that?
The so-called work-life balance is a major question, a major issue for young women who are considering careers in STEM, especially in fields like medicine and chemistry and biology. We refer to sort of break the sciences down in two different ways. The hustle sciences is one way, those that are very demanding, like if you're in medicine or biology, you're doing research, you may have to put in very long hours and many days, maybe 6 or 7 days a week if you've got a research project going or you're covering the wards, as opposed to others that are seen more as requiring more of that innate ability to deal with math and science, like computer sciences and physics, et cetera. But I think the best illustration I can give you of that is that I was speaking at a college along with the woman who was the former dean of students at Harvard Med, and we were speaking to a group of pre-med students, and that was like about 20 years ago. And one of the first questions they asked was, can I be a doc? If I'm a physician, can I have a family too? We went back to speak to students at that school 20 years later. And that was the first question that came up again, showing that young women really have a concern about what is referred to routinely as work-life balance, which some think we really should refer to as sort of work-life compromise, because yes, it can be demanding. To be honest with young women and young men today, I point out that women have certainly succeeded in these fields of STEM and been successful with their family lives or with their outside pursuits, knowing there is more to life than being a physician, more to life than being a computer scientist. You really need to know what's going on in the world around you and participate in that while finding fulfillment with your scientific careers, and try to give them examples of individuals who've done that, and to encourage them to just know it's going to take some compromise, but it can be done. Otherwise, I don't think we see so many women engaged. And actually, not to jump the conversation, but that has become a particular issue for women during this pandemic. Anne referred to the report that just came out, I think was released just last week from the National Academies on COVID and its effect on women, actually women in science, engineering, and medicine, and the issue of childcare, that dual responsibility. And we do know that women's careers have really been more deeply affected than men have been during this pandemic. And it's really, I think, might help us overcome some of the stigma that women have felt related to childcare or family care. Because so often, if flexible programs are offered for promotion or flexible programs are offered for tenure, women have tended not to want to take them because they don't want to be seen as not being dedicated to their careers, while they have every right to do that. And yet, now that with these dual, with the having to work from home, with lack of childcare assistance, women are really publishing less. They're getting less research done, and they're really feeling the effects more so, although obviously some men are also. But I think it's now bringing national attention to the whole issue of family care. Women have been less apt to speak up if they're on a panel or in a discussion at work and it's running late, to say, sorry, I've got to leave. I've got to pick up my kids from childcare, or I've got to pick up my child from here, or go with. They're less apt to want to speak up to say that for fear that their colleagues will think they're not serious about their careers. I think one of the most important things I witnessed was a gentleman who was a scientist who was on a program that I was sponsoring, and the program was running over. And he put his hand up and he said, I'm sorry, but I have to leave because I have to pick my son up from childcare. I've never let him forget it. And I actually, because I thought it was a blessing, because most of the women on that panel would not have volunteered that for fear of how they would seem. So we're now seeing a lot more attention to the issues of family care, dual responsibilities, and maybe out of all the negatives of this pandemic, maybe we'll get some positive response to recognize the importance of childcare, or whether it's elder care or dependent care, on the careers of women in science.
Right. So the emotion of the old trope of you can't balance it all, actually, maybe we should be talking about the effects of how that trope, has on the character, that has the character now rethinking, should I say that I'm actually concerned about my work-life balance or not? There's another thing that I think you've spoken about in the past, which is imposter syndrome.
Yes.
What have you seen of that in women in STEM?
We see this more often in women than we do in men. And imposter syndrome means questioning whether or not you feel you're capable of taking on a responsibility. Should I take this position? Can I really do this? I'm afraid that maybe I'm not prepared. And yet we know that if you go ahead and try it and you're prepared, very often you're going to be successful in it. And that's referred to as the imposter syndrome. Well, not to generalize for all men, but men are more apt to take on something that maybe they haven't faced before and not worry about whether or not they can do it. They just feel more self-assured. So we're trying to bestow more confidence in women, especially women in STEM fields, that if you're well prepared and if you've had the academic background and you see an opportunity, you should take it. Don't start out being self-defeating, thinking you can't do it. Give it a try. You're probably going to succeed. And if you can't, that's where mentors and role models come in to help you. You learn how to get advice because that's what other folks do. And so we're making a real effort to lessen the effects of this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I believe you had an interesting moment when you were in college, if I'm not mistaken, or medical school. Now, this was back in the day, so this is a while ago, but you literally had a man come to you and think you should give up your spot for another man, and if so, why?
When I was in medical school, which was in the 60s, actually at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, I was the only woman, and the only person of color in my medical school class. So it was me and a whole class of white men. And I can still remember to this day, even though it was 1963, I can remember being in anatomy lab, and one of my classmates came up to me and said, "Vivian, you have no business being here. I read ahead in my anatomy book and I learned that women have smaller brains than men. So you will never make it through medical school and you are just taking a place that some man could have." So there, I mean, he had made his prediction I wouldn't make it and had the nerve to tell me that. But I usually, when I show that and show my class picture for first year, I then show my graduating class picture. And I'm there because I did make it through in spite of my smaller brain. But he's not, because actually the guy that said that to me flunked out second year. And so I've learned since way back in the 60s that having a smaller brain doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have lesser intelligence or lesser abilities to succeed in scientific curricula. But that actually happened. And who would have thought? I mean, I learned in the 60s that there were differences in the morphology, actually, of brains between men and women. And then I think back, and maybe to make lemonade out of lemons, maybe he predicted that I was going to end up in a career dealing with gender differences, because that's what I did when I went to NIH, and we focused on sex and gender differences between men and women in different populations. But true occurrence actually happened. I never forgot it.
I'm really interested in hearing you talk about allyship and mentorship, but specifically about the dynamics that are going on. I mean, we were talking about in the world of STEM right now, it's still predominantly male dominated. And in entertainment, it's still predominantly male dominated. So I'm actually curious to hear your side of the point of view about mentoring and allyship from males. This is part of their conversation as well, right?
Yes, yes. When I give a lot of talks, but just because I'm so excited about the field of science and medicine and wanting to encourage young people to consider careers. And so I have a series of a couple of things I call my Penn's Pearls of Wisdom. And one of those is have a mentor and be a mentor, which I use if I'm speaking to high school or college students or speaking to full professors or those who are advanced in their careers, because no matter where you are, it's important to have someone, whether you call them a mentor or an advisor or someone you can seek advice from. It's important to have that. But even if you're in the high school level or college level, it's important to reach back to those behind you to serve as a mentor for them, as an advisor, to encourage those behind you. And that's one of my central thoughts. I think mentoring is so important, and having role models you can look up to so you can see someone who is in a field. You don't want to go into a field where you think you can't be successful. And that's why it's important to have role models. And that's why it's important how women and women scientists are portrayed in the media, in films, in TV programs. Because if you're a young girl and somebody says, "Why don't you think about going into science?" and all you see are white men in those roles, you might think twice about whether or not you want to make the effort to go there if you think you won't be successful. But in looking at mentors, it is important to have a mentor, and not just one mentor. We talk about a mosaic of mentors. For some, one person might serve as that mentor. For others, it might be more than one, someone who can advise you on your career, someone who can advise you on your research, someone who can advise you on your career, real projections, or someone who can help you with your personal issues. And sometimes that may be a male, and sometimes it might be a female. It's important to have female role models, but it's also important to not turn down someone who may be able to help you if you're looking for answers or for guidance for your career paths, etc. I have to say, I'll give you another little episode from when I was in medical school. I've spent a lot of time mentoring, and in fact, I was doing so much mentoring, sort of ad lib, when I first finished my residency, that that the dean, and this was at Tufts Medical School, said to me, I was essentially functioning as a dean of student affairs because I was doing so much mentoring, that he gave me the title Assistant Dean of Student Affairs, and that was back in the 70s. But I think that was because there was only one woman senior faculty member at my medical school. And for some reason, the women there were me and the nurses. And she was not at all nice to us. She had no interest in mentoring any of us or assisting us or advising us. So I really felt I lacked a mentor, a female mentor that I could go to about issues for me as a woman in medicine at a time when it was mostly male dominated. And I think because of feeling that lack myself, as I finished and went into my residency in a faculty position, I didn't think I could turn down somebody who came, who maybe just wanted to talk or get some advice. And I really think it was that negative experience that became a very positive reinforcement for me to be a mentor. And I've done it ever since. I just can't say no because I know what it was like when I felt there was no one I could go to. So just
Right.
another anecdote. But I think
Yeah.
this report has shown that this report actually has data that demonstrates that it makes a big difference for young women to be exposed to mentors and role models early on. For instance, in the field of computer science and physics, et cetera. If there's not good mentoring and role modeling when they're in the college level, they're less apt to go on into those careers at the college and at the postgraduate level. While in medicine, we see a different situation, and that is that we see more women who actually go into fields like biology and medicine and chemistry. But for them, the challenge is getting into leadership positions and progressing to leading roles, decision-making positions. And that's why we have to look at different fields in STEM differently as to what the needs are.
I talked a little bit about the Scully effect. Were there any fictional characters that inspired you as you were working your way through your career?
Not early on, because women just weren't seen as doctors. So books about having a doctor didn't almost never had a woman as a. They did have nurses, and you'd see nurses, and I thought that was great. I just wanted to be a doctor because that's what I saw with making the decision. But one of the slides that was shown in the preview to this session, I want to refer back to, because when everybody was excited about Black Panther, and I wasn't really into Marvel comics, but I said, everybody said, you've got to go see this. I left, but in addition to being excited about the film, what excited me most was that I could hardly sit in my seat, was having a woman of color in that film who was seen as an accomplished scientist dealing with computers, dealing with technology. And that was, what's her name, Shuri. And I came out, and everybody I knew in science and young and old, I said, you've got to see this film because it is showing a woman of color as a competent, accomplished scientist. And to me, that was one of the major messages I took from that film, because so rarely do you see that she wasn't depending on someone else. She was making the decisions. She was doing things. So that was my special excitement. I can't say there have been a lot of those. Being in pathology, which I was for the first 25 years of my career, most pathologists were portrayed in the media and in books and all as, the fat drunk who was in the basement with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth out of a light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the morgue. And that wasn't me. So, when people want to know what is a pathologist, what do you do? And you don't look like what I would think of a pathologist as being. But it was not until 1993 when Victoria Rowell actually played a pathologist on Diagnosis Murder, the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I was so delighted that finally here was a woman, and a woman of color, who was actually portraying a pathologist. She didn't do the usual things because they were that wasn't the intent of the show, but still, here was someone that I could point to when people want to know what is a pathologist and say, here is another woman pathologist and a woman of color who you can see just by watching this television series. But those examples are rare, are very rare.
Wendy and Vivian, I hate to interrupt this amazing dialogue, but we are being absolutely flooded with some really great questions. And so I wonder if we can maybe shift gears a little and go right into Q&A, if that's okay with both of you. So we have some really wonderful questions coming in. One I'm going to direct towards Dr. Pinn. One question is, women mentors and role models are definitely important for young STEM professionals. I wonder if Dr. Pinn had some male mentors who were her champions. How can we encourage more men to support and mentor female STEM professionals?
Yes, in fact, all my mentors for many years until I really got into advanced careers were men, because there were so few women who were in medicine, so few women who were in academic medicine especially. And so I was fortunate because actually that's how I ended up in pathology, which you heard me say I grew up wanting to be a pediatrician and yet ended up in the field of pathology. And that's because I was hired as a research assistant during my college years by a pathologist, a male pathologist, who was an immunopathologist, who got me involved in research and who really fostered and supported my efforts, and actually had me come back and work with him every summer during medical school. And that's how I ended up doing my internship at Mass General Hospital, even after completing my education at UVA. And he and the other, I must say, that was a very supportive environment. And I have to thank them for supporting me, not only then, but when I became a department chair, I could call on my former department chair and other department chairs to give me support and give me advice. So I have, and now I do have women mentors, even at this age and stage. There are many women that I can call on as I've gotten to know other women who are wonderful in science. Ruth Kirstein, who was the first woman and for many years the only woman to serve as an institute director at NIH. Bernadine Healy, who hired me at NIH, who is the only woman to ever serve as director of NIH. Shirley Malcolm at AAAS, who is younger than I am, but I consider her my mentor because she has so much experience in dealing with science and equal opportunities in fields of science. But I think it is important for women to know that you need to find mentors who can best advise you, be they male or female, and those who can give you the kind of positive support you need, and also are willing to give you honest opinions when you may be going in a wrong direction. If you get someone who's just going to be a yes man, yes woman, that's not helpful. You want a mentor who's going to be honest with you and help you make the right decisions for your own career, not based on what someone else is doing.
Great. So next question I'm going to direct to Wendy, and this comes, I guess, from a writer, and they ask, what kind of responsibilities should writers take on to tackle these issues? I have often been told not to specify race in a script and to leave it open, but then it often is defaulted to white. Does diversity of these roles start on the page, or is it something that should be addressed in casting or at later stages?
I think it absolutely starts on the page. Diversity. It starts when you're breaking story, when it's still cards on the whiteboard, or today it would be on the Trello, because I do think it's important to give these characters agency from the beginning as you're building them. And, again, some of the ways to make sure of that is to, yes, put it on the page, but also talk through it with the room. Say there's a very specific reason why I want this character to be Middle Eastern. There's a very specific reason why I want this character to be a female. And then, like I say, oftentimes when you get opposition, because the default is white. The default is white. I'm not going to lie. But when you get that opposition, you sort of need to be prepared to say why that's important to the character. And that means you'll have done some homework as to why this is it's important to that character to be that. And also, for me, what works a lot is that we have been fed so many stories that were white male dominated. that the minute you change the gender and the culture and ethnicity of a character, you suddenly are looking at, you could be looking at the same story, but you're looking at it through a different lens. And now you're able to tell a different type of story. And so I always encourage people to go for diversity because it diversifies your stories. Your story becomes that much more rich. And I think that that's something that we all, we have to make a very conscious effort for it. And then you have to follow it through. You have to follow it through all the way through every draft. You have to follow it through on the casting. You have to make sure you stay on top of casting and that they're, honoring your request. And then, if you're lucky, and I've been so blessed, you go to set and you make sure those details are done right too. All the way through post, you keep checking that character. And it does require an extra layer of work, but it is really, really worth it.
And I have to commend Wendy for what you just said, because it makes such a difference to us who witness the outcomes of those efforts that you make.
Yeah,
So
like I said, with the Hidden Figures, that's just one example, but you have the ability to, especially if you're writing for something like television and you're reaching a mass audience, you have the ability to really touch somebody. You could really change somebody's life.
So true. So there's been several variations of this question. So I'm going to sort of do a mashup of several questions here. But someone asked, many women at the highest levels of chemistry, physics, and engineering have elected not to have children for a variety of reasons. Child and elder care is a barrier to high performance in STEM, in my opinion. And I'll just say the research supports that. Is it a barrier? Vivian, as a former lead of the Office of Research on Women's Health at NIH, I'm curious if this is an issue you came across, and if so, what can be done to address the collision of career timelines and life timelines for scientists, engineers, and medical professionals?
Well, I think let's say when I first started in medicine, there was such a bias about women that women were asked questions when they were being considered for medical school or being considered for residency training programs if they planned to have children. And sometimes that was held as a negative against giving them positions. Fortunately, that's illegal to do now, and that's not done anymore, although every now and then somebody tells me about being asked a question like that. But for many women, and we've seen it through the years, we hear more about those who elect not to have children than those who do have children. But I know a woman who came through about the same time I did, who had her fourth child by the time she finished medical school and ended up with 5 children, had a successful career, a successful family, and did very well. Looking at women in other fields, sometimes that pressure does get to women, or sometimes they're too busy for a social life. I like to think of it as just a period of animated suspension because you're working so hard. But that doesn't rule out having a social life or a family life. But to me, it's an individual decision, and the career should not force one to sacrifice having a family if one wants to. And certainly we need to give more attention to the women who have really, really been successful at doing that. Looking at the data for how women are affected by the pandemic, especially as it relates to family care and child care across all areas of STEM, points out that it is not unique for women to have families and to have other responsibilities. People ask me about mine. I didn't have much work-life balance, but I'll say it wasn't because I didn't want to. It's that little issue of fibroids early in my life. So I put a lot of money into fibroid research when I was at NIH. So it wasn't because I felt that I couldn't be successful in my career and have children. I just couldn't. So there are other factors that especially affect women of color, where in fact fibroids are more common. But and that's just to give you a little personal bit, and I don't mind sharing it at this age. It's just something to think about. But I don't know of that many women in the last 30 years, and I've been around for over 50 years, the last 30 years, who have made a decision not to have children because they were concerned about their positions. And I hope we don't see that in the future. There are some who have because they felt they couldn't give their time to their families, but those are personal decisions. My feeling is that women need to make the decisions that are going to make them happiest. and that it is possible to do that compromise between work and between family life. I remember speaking on work-life balance way back before it was a general term in an audience of women in dealing with career issues. And this topic came up, and I'll never forget a woman who went on to really be very well known in science looked at me, and I was at the NIH dinner, and said, "Dr. Pinn, NIH needs to tell women to only marry men who are going to help them with their family responsibilities." Well, my response was, I don't think government can tell people who to fall in love with or who to marry, but we can tell women to take that into consideration when they're planning for their futures. Just another little anecdote.
Thanks, Vivian. This is another really great question. And somebody asked, what role do you think HBCUs play in producing women in STEM? I am at an HBCU and mentor students and welcome the insight. Before we jump into, I want to hear Wendy and Vivian's responses to this, but I'll also note that the National Academy has a report dedicated to the role that minority serving institutions can play as an underutilized resource in our future of developing STEM professionals. So there's more to be read there. But Wendy and Vivian, what do you think about the role of HBCUs?
Wendy?
Well, Vivian, I think you should probably go first, but I'm happy to chime in. I'd love to hear more.
The HBCUs have, over the years, been the major producers of people of color, men and women, who have gone into STEM careers. I remember when I was the dean at Tufts and looking at schools and looking for pre-med students of color, that while we'd see them coming from some so-called majority institutions, it was really HBCUs that were producing the major applicants. And then you look at even in fields, well, let me just say that to not be long-winded on this, I think they have been a major source of encouragement and support for their students to consider fields of STEM. We've got some excellent scientists, STEM scientists teaching and administrating at many of those institutions. And I'm delighted to say that today we're seeing a sort of reemergence of the leadership of HBCUs in encouraging and stimulating their students to go into fields of STEM. So the bottom line is, I think that HBCUs have had a wonderful, outstanding role. And they're seeing that, for so many years, students were, as they had opportunities to go to majority schools, best students weren't all going to HBCUs. But I think today we're seeing HBCUs emerge again. And I did teach at Howard for a number of years. So I actually have had a faculty role at an HBCU. And I'm just so proud of many of my former students as I see the roles they have moved into and what they are doing to encourage and to mentor others coming behind them.
Yeah, I can personally say that my brother is a graduate of Tuskegee University. He went on to become one of the pilots of Air Force Two during the Obama administration, and currently flies for the CEO of Lowe's and is the head of their fleet. So that is a personal impact of an HBCU on someone I love and admire deeply, which is my own brother. But, again, that special air missions, when we would go on family day, yeah, we were the Black family. You know what I mean? But we felt great being the Black family, because it's like, we are here. We are here, and we're it just felt good to be a part of it. And so I know that for me too, a lot of the things that I've been developing, especially on the unscripted side, feature especially young women of color. And those are going to give us opportunities to tell stories at HBCUs and actually see what that is and expose that to this next generation, who I think are all seeing, Kamala Harris, and seeing all the other people who are representative of HBCUs, and having a whole new level of respect and understanding, and see the power that particular area has on encouraging more people of color, especially, to go into sciences.
This was such a great conversation. We hate to let you go. We have to kick the three of you out to go over to the other Q&A. So the conversation is not done. You all get to continue. We don't get to continue in here. We see some folks are leaving because they're heading over to the other one. But thank you both so much. I mean, it really was exactly the conversation that we wanted to have. And we hope that there are some people out there. We provided the link to the report, to the Promising Practices report. We hope that you do go take a deeper dive in there. If you don't want to read the whole thing, all our reports come with an amazing executive summary. So there is that. But it is worth a read. And there's lots of other resources, as Wendy pointed out, from the Gina Davis Institute. And people should go take a look at that as well. So as I say, thank you both very much. We will let you go click on your other Zoom link. And Rick and I hope that, I don't think we are going to be sending you an invitation for next week. We're going to take a bye week for next week, but we will be back the week after that because we have oh, you've got it. Okay, because there's a Nobel Prize Summit that the Academy will be hosting. Invitations went out today. You may have actually received one. It's for the end of April. And apropos of that summit, we will be welcoming we have Marty Chalfie, who is a Nobel Prize winner and who will be part of that summit. We also have Kim Stanley Robinson, who, of course, as many people know, is an acclaimed science fiction writer who will be joining us. And then we also have a wonderful climate scientist and a good friend of the Academy, Shaz, who is going to be with us. And so I think that it's going to be a really good.
And we have screenwriter Joe
Oh,
Cole.
Joe Cole. God, how could I have forgotten that?
Who wrote Black Panther, which Vivian mentioned today. So
you're right. Completely
if you
forgot.
have questions for Joe about Black Panther, please don't forget to tune in 2 weeks.
Yes, that's right. So it's going to be a really good event. We hope you're back and you join us for that. I think that it'll be a nice week off for next week. We'll take a breath and let you breathe and then come back for next time.
I'm going to catch up on my email. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Bye.